All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Hello, 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 hello. I think we're good. I think we're good. Okay, all right. Welcome back. It's been a few weeks. Uh, it's been a few weeks since we've done a live like this. As you can see, we have some furniture rearrangements going on here. Have some baby furniture going on in the background. So my office is kind of going through a metamorphosis as we speak. So it's been a few weeks we've taken off, but we're coming back and to kind of go along with the blogs and everything that's going on. So let's get into it. Today, as the title will suggest, is we're going to be talking about the benefits of red light therapy. Now, if you've been around here, I'd say at least the last 6 months or so, you will know that this is kind of a big deal for me. One of the reasons for this is because as I've kind of evolved as a practitioner and a doctor kind of over my career, there's always like an inkling, I think, that certain things are missing or maybe not taken seriously. And I believe the story with light, and if you want to learn more about it, I have tons of blogs on it. If you go through Becoming Invincible, I have the 3-part series on sunlight. I have a ton of stuff on water, kind of how a lot of this stuff works, how light interacts with a lot of this. I highly suggest reading some of those and signing up. It's all free. It's on my website. And the reason being is because as modern humans, we are becoming the most, not becoming, we are the most disconnected from nature we've ever been. The modern human, as far as any, previous generations, and that seems to be getting more obvious, more blatant than ever before. But today, and we've talked a little bit about EMFs, things going on with 5G, non-native EMFs. I did a shorter series on that. You could check it out. That is very much more so about like what to do. Certainly covered some science stuff. We talked about it as it pertains to certain chronic challenges, as far as chronic health challenges, diabetes, blood sugar control, things of that nature. But we're not going to talk about that today. I want to talk about this in the realm of sunlight, and particularly red and infrared, because one of the things, if you're here, you probably heard about it before, is a lot of the lights, including the lights in here, and the lights coming off my computer screen or my phone right now, they're all predominantly in the blue wavelengths of light. Your TV, whatever you're watching this on, they're you do not get the full spectrum of sunlight like you would if you were outside, and most of it that's cut out is usually in the UV spectrum and in the red and infrared spectrum. And this is why light has become a very important topic, for me. And I think more recently, I'm becoming more convinced that maybe investing in a red light machine, or honestly, like going outside, is more important than your supplement routine. And I've mentioned that before, but we've just become so divorced from nature. We need to figure it out. Now, using sunlight to heal has been around for thousands of years. You could date this back to the ancient Greeks. It really came around, and I've done posts on this too. You could check out the blog, that it came back around in the early 20th century with Niels Vincent, Auguste Rollier, the former of which actually won a Nobel Prize for using UV light to treat things like, what was it? Oh, tuberculosis and rickets using light. So pretty fascinating stuff. But it kind of fell out with the advent of big pharma coming in, sunscreen companies coming in, and really singing a different note, singing a different song. And that's kind of the way we've been going since probably like the 1960s, 70s, something around there. So what I want to talk about today is really like visible light and the light really emitted from the sun. And generally, that's broken up into three main categories. We have infrared, we have the visible light spectrum, we have UV. And we're going to focus mostly on infrared because that's the stuff that tends to get cut out. Now, there's a window right behind me, and I know a lot of these modern windows actually block out most infrared light. And usually it's under the context of being economically efficient, energy efficient, right? Because infrared, we don't actually perceive. We can't see infrared like certain species can. We actually perceive it as heat. So because it blocks out the heat, maybe you don't have to cool houses as much. So now they're being dubbed, energy efficient windows, energy efficient glass, etc. So even if you're standing behind that, you might not necessarily be getting the full spectrum of sunlight. And a lot of these windows also already negate UV. So you're already kind of missing that. So unless you're getting the direct exposure, unless you have special glass or are looking through quartz windows instead of glass windows, UV is going to get reflected. You're not going to be getting exposed to it unless you have, skin exposure. Now, we'll go in order. We'll go from highest energy down to infrared and red. And UV, ultraviolet, above violet, right, in terms of energy, is the highest frequency, highest energy of the visible light, or really the spectrum of the sun, the spectrum of light that gets through the atmosphere and to Earth. Generally, UV is broken up into three main categories. We have UVA, UVB, UVC. Now, UVC does not necessarily get through the atmosphere. Actually, 100% of it is absorbed in the ozone layer. So it never reaches the Earth's surface. Now, UVC is the shortest wavelength, so the highest energy of the three. It's actually used, by the way. So we have UVC lights that are used in sanitation, so cleaning things up. Hospitals might use UVC lighting to actually decontaminate hospital rooms. And we know that UVC light, ultraviolet C light, is actually emitted by cells. And I talked about this in a separate blog when I talked about Fritz Pop's work. He actually measured UVC light in very low doses being emitted by individual cells, and that's how they communicate with each other. Even though that light does not reach us via the sun through the atmosphere, through the ozone layer. UVB is primarily responsible for initiating the production of vitamin D, and that comes with skin exposure, right? UVA is really mostly for the tanning effect. Is usually that's the tanning effect comes from UVA exposure. Now, UVA also has other therapeutic effects. It's certainly antibiotic, antimicrobial, really powerful in and of its own right. Same with UVB, but just it's a little different. Visible light. Now, the band of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can see is called visible light. Now, different wavelengths of light are responsible for different things. And they all have unique effects. Obviously, we just talked about violet and the ultraviolet side of things, but they do other things. Like, for example, in the blue-green spectrum, a lot of that is set to help set our circadian rhythm. That is one of the reasons why blue light, particularly at night, is really damaging, because it disrupts our ability to set or align our circadian rhythms with that of the earth, of nature. So that becomes a big problem. It also triggers the production of certain hormones and neurotransmitters, because just like our eyes and our brain are on a 24-hour circadian rhythm, each individual cell is on its own circadian rhythm as well. So different organs become more active. They do more work depending on the time of day. This is one of the reasons, and this week's blog is actually going to be talking about sleep apnea. Sleep is super important, and light exposure at night is really important, because a lot of the detoxification, the rejuvenation, the repair that goes on in the body, it's not always active at the same time. It's mostly happening while you're sleeping. That's why you'll hear sleep experts or those who know a little bit about circadian health will talk about, really the hours between 10 p.m. or so and 4 a.m. They call them the golden hours, because those are the times that your organs, like your liver and your lymphatic system and your kidneys and your spleen, are doing a lot of the work that they can to do what they need to do. Finally, we get to red and infrared, and that's what we're going to talk mostly about today. Now, the nice thing about red and infrared is they are primarily known for their frequencies for healing and longevity. Um, Albert St. Georgi, who's actually the man who discovered vitamin C, is the one who realized that light, well, A, proteins are semiconductors, which I've talked about in the past. And then B, there's a light component to how cells communicate. It can't all just be the biochemistry that we learned, in, well, your biochemistry class or things of that nature. It's actually we're electrical beings that initiate and get energy from the sun through those different spectrums, and infrared and red light are that. And in fact, infrared light, infrared energy, about 50% of all the energy that comes off of the sun is actually in the infrared spectrum. So even though we don't perceive it as far as visually, we perceive it as heat. So this is why folks, might find saunas very regenerative, very healing. It's actually because it's the infrared energy. Part of it is that infrared energy you're getting from being in one of those machines, or in saunas, I should say. Now, one of the things you've seen, especially online, and this was something that I was, skeptical of, years ago, was red light therapy. And again, in my, I guess, ignorance, I found out that turns out there's been studies on specifically infrared and red light therapy, whether it's laser or LED, going back some 60 years or so. And it's been very, very well researched for a variety of things. Now, more recently, we've been able to figure out some of the mechanisms as to why. And if you want to look into some of that, I would say the premier researcher out there is a man named Michael Hamblin. You could look up, he has some lectures on YouTube, which are pretty fascinating. And he's got some really good information. So what's going on with red and infrared that makes it so beneficial, right? So when I use these, first of all, let's talk about how I use them. So I'll use these frequencies, to treat pain or injuries. You can actually put light over an exposed area. So that area needs to be open. You can't have clothing on top of it or anything like that. That's going to impair your ability to get the energy you need in. You're actually going to have exposed skin. So, pain, injuries, really great for brain health. We're going to get into some of the benefits and some of the studies in a bit, so I don't want to go too far into it. But you also, the cool part about it is, and this is a very Americana way of going about things, you don't necessarily always need more. You just need a certain amount to get things going. So in other words, more isn't necessarily better. It's just more. What I do like, and what seems to be the best, and this is from talking to other people, and you could actually check the live I did. I mentioned this last week that I did with the CEO of Fringe, who is basically, I use their red light products, which I will let you know right now. And there's a code on Instagram. It's Vincent15 if you want to try their products out. The reason I like their products, and I think, is because they use wavelengths that are closest to mimicking and intensities that are similar to that of the sun. And that seems to be the sweet spot. In other words, you could certainly find more powerful products. You could certainly find more intense products, but you generally want to look for strength and intensities that are closer to mimicking what sunlight would actually give you. Those seem to be what gives you the best output at the end of the day. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. Now, as far as the mechanisms, like how does this work? Why does this work? I find there's, three main ways. It's reducing oxidative stress, improving metabolism, and reducing inflammation. So reducing oxidative stress, I actually talked about this in a previous blog. So one of the things that infrared light does is it triggers the production of melatonin inside mitochondria, not necessarily in the pineal gland. Now, I mentioned this in the past, but most of the melatonin in our bodies is not made or used in the pineal gland. That's only about 5% of it. The other 95% of the melatonin in your body is actually made within mitochondria, within cells, and then used in those same mitochondria. So supplementing, for example, with melatonin will not affect this system. That's why taking melatonin supplements tend to make you more sleepy. So that's a big one. The reason why is during as you create water, as you create ATP in the electron transport chain, some things that are created are things known as reactive oxygen species, which are important and they are useful. They do play a role in cell signaling. They do have benefits as far as cellular communication, but too much of them becomes a problem. And that's what antioxidants like melatonin do. They help neutralize those. They also help improve metabolism. So mitochondria effectively also are responsible for how our metabolism runs, right? So in addition to regulating reactive oxygen species via melatonin, mitochondria also make ATP. Now, I've talked about ATP in the past. ATP probably is not the energy currency, so to speak, but what it does do is it changes the shape of proteins so that you can have more easy water, have more structured water to propel protons and electrons to signal different things to different cells at different times. Near-infrared light also stimulates cytochrome C oxidase, which is important for creating that ATP. So it allows those proteins to change shape as they need to. The final thing that red and near-infrared do as far as mechanisms is reduce inflammation. So, and this is different to say taking things like NSAIDs because there are no, side effects. Now, what they do is, they help reduce reactive oxygen species if there's too many, reactive nitrogen species, prostaglandins, and things that are also tend to be in higher amounts when there is chronic inflammation. And there are different mechanisms, necessarily for this, but effectively it has to do with a lot of that neutralization. A lot of it's via melatonin that I talked about, that subcellular, that intracellular melatonin. That's really important. And this shows up in a variety of ways as we're going to get down into it. So I would say those are the main things. Now, as far as okay, that's cool, but what can I use it for? That's what I want to spend, basically the rest of this chat talking about. So I have a kind of list and some studies. I'm not going to go too deep into them, but I will talk, and this will be more for the blog, and I'll save the links and such because this will be for next week. But I'll mention them here. So sleep is a big one. Now, one of the reasons is, again, kind of if you think about daylight, right? Sunlight, you're going to have mostly red and infrared light in the morning. In the middle of the day, you're going to get those blues and greens and into the UV spectrum as the sun goes overhead. Then as it sets, those blue greens get lighter, dimmer, and effectively all you're left with is red and infrared until the sun goes down and then it's dark. So essentially that fading into red, that fading into infrared is another trigger. Okay, it's time to wind down, get ready for bed. So applying photobiomodulation, red infrared light therapy, can actually improve sleep quality. Ideally, you want to do this, by the way, when there's no other artificial light sources out. So ideally at night, you don't want to do this when you're having all your overhead lights on at night. That this probably isn't going to be as effective. So you have to take that context into account. What they have seen is that photobiomodulation actually helps improve sleep duration, particularly in athletes, which is pretty cool. So when photobiomodulation is applied during sleep, they found an increased clearance of waste products. So we talked about that detoxification part, particularly in the brain. So using photobiomodulation as you sleep, say wearing a headpiece or something of that nature, and this could also happen while you're awake, but one study did it while you're sleeping. There was actually improved brain flow, cerebrospinal fluid flow to the brain, clearance of waste products in both the brain and the blood, which is very important. So really helpful as far as that goes. That being said, another thing that kind of goes off of that is cognitive function, right? So red and near infrared, and we actually kind of learn this when we're taking physical exam classes. So you can actually do, you could check different sinuses in the skull by using a flashlight. And you can put that flashlight angled at certain ways and you could see the light shine through. Now, if you could see the light shine through with, a flashlight, you know that the reds, that the infrared, if it has infrared coming off of it, will penetrate through, because if visible light can, generally speaking, longer wavelengths of light penetrate deeper, penetrate further than shorter. That's why UVC, which has the shortest wavelengths of the UV spectrum, don't penetrate the Earth's atmosphere, don't penetrate the ozone layer. So sunlight, yes, can actually penetrate the skull. So knowing that, we know red infrared light can do that because those are the longest wavelengths that get through. Now, photobiomodulation has actually been shown to improve cognitive function in both healthy subjects, but also people who are suffering from different neurological challenges. Now, some of the things that improved include executive function, which is your ability to make decisions, plan, perform tasks, also memory. However, red light therapy, infrared light therapy, can also be helpful for those who have had traumatic brain injuries and strokes. So concussions, all forms of TBI, and this is thought to because photobiomodulation actually upregulates brain repair mechanisms like we talked about in sleep. And there's a systematic review that showed that using photobiomodulation actually helped people with Alzheimer's disease by decreasing the oxidative stress in the brain. So using these different wavelengths of light are actually improving different neurological disorders, whether it's, in some cases, it's Parkinson's, in some cases, it's Alzheimer's, in some cases, it's concussions, in some cases, it's memory loss, just general cognitive decline, just by using red light therapy. Super powerful stuff. Another one, which is one of my favorites, is actually improvement of the lymphatic function. And I was thinking about this. I probably should have put this first because it kind of dovetails into everything else. Now, I talked about the lymphatic system before, but generally speaking, there's three major functions, right? It's the cellular highway, right? It's transports, metabolic waste, damaged cells, dietary fats, hormones, all of these things get funneled through the lymphatic system. Fluid homeostasis is really important as well. So, one of the things that the kidneys are really important for is balancing blood pressure, right? And right on top of the kidneys sits these adrenal glands, which are effectively the body's pharmacy. That's where most of your steroid hormones are going to be churned out of. It's the adrenal glands, and those get stimulated by what's going on through the kidneys. But it's important to think that the lymphatic system acts like a custodian. It mops up all the stuff, all the extra interstitial fluid, circulates it, cleans out whatever's needed, and then we eliminate it, whether it's through pee or poop or what have you. The other thing it does is actually immune signaling. So most of our immune system is actually located in the lymphatic system. So most of those white blood cells that we talk about, neutrophils, macrophages, etc., all those are located in the lymphatic system. That's why when you hear about when you'll hear people say like 70% or 80% of the lymphatic system is in the gut, technically it's in that lining right around it. And it's in this lymphoid tissue. It's actually called gut-associated lymphoid tissue, or MALT, mucosal-associated lymphoid tissue, for different mucosal linings. That's because that's the interface between the inside and outside world. So we need that lymphatic system to kind of, filter through what's going on, what could be allowed in, what needs to come back out, etc. It's effectively part of the immune system. So the lymphatic system, immune system, they go hand in hand. Because we have the blood system, as we talked about, that brings nutrition to cells. The lymphatic system is, the bathroom, if you will. It's how we get rid of it. So that's an important part. Now, the lymphatic system, obviously, because it's part of the immune system, is going to play a major role in regulating inflammation. It's going to play a role in removing excess fluid. And it also is going to be impacted by the amount of structured water in the body. Now, why is this important? Red light therapy, infrared wavelengths, actually can increase the amount of structured water in the body. It effectively builds that battery, that wire that connects all of this, that allows these different signals to kind of go through the body. So the more of this structured water you have, the easier it is to kind of have these things flow through the body, not get stagnant, not get clogged, not get mucked up. So red light is going to be really impactful for lymphatic drainage. And basically, anytime you're going to be talking about inflammation, that's really when you're going to be talking about lymphatic stagnation. They kind of go hand in hand. This is why you'll see inflammation as a hallmark of many of the modern diseases that we diagnose, whether it's arthritis or ulcerative colitis, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, depression, inflammatory bowel disease. All of these are related to inflammation, i.e. related to the lymphatic system in some way. Another thing that's actually really important is it helps speed healing from injuries, which is huge. So, as someone who's, it enjoys athletics, this is a big one. So whether we have studies that show that photobiomodulation speeds up the recovery process from post-exercise. So some people might see this as DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, but it's also really helpful for wound healing and has been shown to be effective for burns, which is great because it will help obviously repair those areas as needed. It could also help speed healing from injuries to bone, including fractures and complex fractures as well. It's also been helpful for tendon injuries. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can use photobiomodulation for injuries, which are fantastic. I actually had an older patient of mine message me today. She was like, yeah, I've been trying chiropractic and all these other things for this lower back, like sacral pain I've been having. And as soon as I use the red light, that's what helped the most. Now, the red light, because I saw one of these things come in, the red light that I recommend, I mentioned this at the front, is I like Fringe products. That's the name of the company, Fringe, Fring. I believe their website is fringeheals.com. The reason I like those is because their products, like I mentioned before, tend to mimic the emission that the sun gives off as far as intensity is concerned. And from what I've seen, from what I've talked about with a few other people, that seems to be kind of the sweet spot, getting as close as to the emission of the sun for most things tends to be the most helpful. What I like about their products too, and I don't have my panel up here with me, but is they have a timer on it for 20 minutes. Generally speaking, you're going to want to use this for 10 minutes to 20 minutes or so. Don't really need much more than that per day on a given area. So if you're using, a wrap or something, don't necessarily need much more than that. So that's where I would kind of go. There is, and I'll mention this at the end, but I do have a code. It's Vincent 15. It's gonna give you 15% off between now and April 17th, which is next Wednesday. So if you're looking for them, those are the ones that I use. I highly recommend. If you want to check it out, there's a link in my bio on Instagram, but also it should be on YouTube. So yeah. So lymphatic function, really important. Anxiety and depression is another big one. So there are studies that use photobiomodulation to reduce depression in both humans and animals, and this is likely due to improvements, we think, in mitochondrial function. And also increased brain blood flow, because we mentioned before, as far as injuries to the brain, it increases blood flow. It also increases the clearance of waste products from the brain. So pretty cool. There was a 2009 study that showed reduction in symptoms from depression and anxiety from one red light therapy treatment, one photobiomodulation treatment. Now, if you're not new around here, you know that, like, particularly depression, especially if it's seasonally associated, SAD, seasonal affective disorder, A lot of that times it's really a sunlight deficiency, so it's not too surprising to see that red light, which again, you're not going to get unless you're going outside, because it's not going to come through the windows. It's not going to come through the screens. It's going to come from actually getting direct sunlight. Makes a major difference. The effects of photobiomodulation on mental health are really compelling. Actually, a systematic review concluded that they strongly recommend it as a treatment for moderate depressive disorders, and is recommended also for anxiety. And in a lot of these studies, again, they apply it directly to the skull, but there's also a piece, they use an intranasal piece. So a piece that goes up your nose, and then you shine a light essentially into, the cavity where the brain sits. Gut health. Now, this is a big one and probably the most surprising one, at least for me when I learned it, because if you remember, did a live a while back, I found a study where these researchers were able to change the gut microbiome by just shining UV light, UVB light specifically. And that shouldn't seem too surprising, I guess, once you realize that, yeah, vitamin D is also important for gut health and plays an important role in that. But UV light exposure actually changes the microbiome diversity in the gut alone, independent of food intake. And what's cool is in this study, they actually compared people. One group got a UV treatment, a UVB treatment, and the other did vitamin D supplementation and got the UVB treatment. And the one that only got the UVB treatment actually saw the microbiome diversity change, which was super, super interesting. Now, why might infrared or red light therapy help this? And I think this is going to be the future. And I started doing this personally. I really want to start trying to do this with other folks that I work with, is try a red light panel around the abdomen if they're struggling with gut disorders on top of what they're doing, to see if they can get some of that, some of those changes to maybe happen at a faster rate. Because if you're able to rebalance that microbiome in a shorter period of time using a tool that's non-invasive at all, it's really powerful. And again, yes, you can probably get a lot of these same benefits by literally exposing the area to sunlight. I am aware, though, I am pragmatic enough that a lot of us work jobs indoors a lot of times. And certainly it will not replace getting outside or getting skin exposure to the sun, but it can help in that transition, because this is likely it's something that's going to take some time. Now, probably some of the benefits are going to come from the anti-inflammatory effects that we talked about earlier, obviously without the side effects of things like, say, NSAIDs. But other things that might play a role, at least according to one study, would be improving communication between the microbiome and the rest of the body. We've talked about the gut-brain connection a lot. Improving digestion and the production of energy and nutrients. That's really important, right? Because we have the digestive part, but also the absorption part, right? So it's one thing to break down food. It's another thing to absorb it and actually assimilate the nutrients. They're not the same thing. Also decreases inflammation and production of reactive oxygen species. So if you're not overloaded with oxygen species, that gives a chance for healthier gut microbes to be around. Also can increase the production of short-chain fatty acids, which help immune system function and gut health. So if you ever did a stool analysis or gut test, maybe you've seen some of these short-chain fatty acids, like, say, butyrate. If those are low, usually that's a good sign that either the microbiome diversity isn't there, or you don't have the species you need to create those, which actually provide the gut lining with the energy it needs to be healthy, to absorb and break down what you actually need. So some crazy studies. So they've actually used red light and near infrared to apply it to the abdomen in patients with Parkinson's disease. And they found that they were able to change the gut microbiome and shift it towards a healthier group, a healthier diversity of them. They did this for 12 weeks, and they also found decreased symptoms of Parkinson's by applying it, by the way, to the abdomen. So targeting the gut connection of Parkinson's disease. And they were also seeing a change in the microbiome and a change in the severity of the symptoms of folks with Parkinson's. And they found that they did this for 12 weeks, that the improvements lasted for up to a year. That is really, really exciting stuff. So 12 weeks, using a red light, infrared light treatment can actually give you benefits for up to a year as it pertains to Parkinson's, which is really, really cool to see. They did similar things with Alzheimer's. And there was a 2022 study that they took folks who were diagnosed with either moderate or mild forms of Alzheimer's, and they found that those who got the red light therapy compared to controls had better cognitive function. It's really, really powerful information, really powerful stuff. And as far as, what's happening in the microbiome, there is research that shows that using the red light, using the photobiomodulation, changes the ratio of firmicutes to bacteroides. So these are different families of bacteria. You could actually see these changes, again, just using red light therapy. So a lot of gut health improvements from just using red light, which is really, really cool stuff. Clearer skin. Now, generally speaking, if there's something going wrong in the gut, that's going to manifest itself in other ways. For some folks, that is skin. So it's not surprising to see that would be some benefits. So not only will it be helpful for things, say, like psoriasis or acne or rosacea, we also mentioned before, it can help with scar healing, can help with wrinkles, can help with herpes. There are different studies on all of these. And what's also really cool is it's actually, because it can help increase collagen production, it can actually help stimulate hair growth, which is really nice. And they found that particularly using, headpieces that go over the head. So really, really fascinating stuff. Athletic performance is another big one. So whether it's from, and there's different mechanisms for this, whether it's increasing ATP production and improving mitochondrial health, there are different studies that show that it improves things like muscle fatigue, improving muscle capacity, and speeding up post-exercise recovery. So shorter recovery times using photobiomodulation. Really cool stuff. One of the cheesier benefits, but it seems to be real, is actually fat loss. And I know, I think some people kind of roll their eyes like, oh, this is like another gimmick. But turns out there's actually research to back it up that it can promote fat loss. Especially it seems like when it's combined with exercise. So it turns out there was a study with obese women, and they found that using photobiomodulation with exercise resulted with a higher percentage of fat loss compared to using a placebo light. And again, I would believe they did not do this in the study, but say if those same women did their exercise outside under the sun, they would probably get a similar, if not better, result. Another study found similar results. So along with the changes that I mentioned above, there was also an increase in brown adipose tissue, which actually improves metabolism. So take a step back. There's two different types of adipose tissue. We have white fat tissue and brown fat tissue. Generally, the brown adipose tissue, we see that a lot in hibernating animals because that's generally where that energy is stored to give off heat as they hibernate. So they build up brown fat stores. As they hibernate, they kind of get smaller because that's what's used for energy to keep them alive while they hibernate. As humans, we don't necessarily have a lot of brown fat, but we do know that brown fat that we do have is much more metabolically active than the white fat that probably most of us are more familiar with. And then the last thing I want to touch on before we get to this is the structured water part. And again, I probably should have started with this, but it's probably the most controversial because I think it's maybe the next step that most practitioners aren't at, or not using this as the lens that they're looking at things through. And I get why, because it's a brand new paradigm. It looks at things differently. A lot of it has to do with that melatonin production that I talked about. That's that subcellular melatonin that is mostly that 95% of all melatonin in the body It's actually made in mitochondria to help manage reactive oxygen species that are produced through the electron transport chain. It helps the mitochondria create more water, more structured water. Again, that water is not the same as the water in this water bottle. It's different. It's structured. It's more of a gel-like substance. It has a liquid crystalline apparatus. If you haven't read The Fourth Phase of Water by Gerald Pollack, I highly recommend reading it. It is not super technical. There's a lot of images and pictures. And for me, that's where I started too, because this is a big, shift in how we look at health and medicine. But more importantly, if he's right, and I think he is, at least on most of what he writes, it's going to completely change how we look at medicine and why I think light, things like red, infrared light are so important. And I do believe, this is the future of medicine. This is where it's going to go. Like I mentioned earlier, this is what I believe. I do believe your light exposure, your light routine, your light environment is going to be more important than your supplement routine, because that's going to impact how you sleep, because that's going to impact your energy levels, because that's going to impact how well you digest food, how you repair, your pain tolerance, your athletic performance, your cognitive function, your inflammation levels are all impacted by your light environment. And there's a lot of research to back that up. So that's what I got for you. There's a ton, like I said, this is scratching the surface. This is base level stuff as far as like, I did not put too many hours into kind of looking this up. It was more just like, okay, what are the broad categories? Like, how deep does this rabbit hole go? And I could tell you for certain, I'm literally just scratching the surface here as far as the benefits of specifically red light and infrared, which is photobiomodulation. Now, like I said, you can probably get most of these benefits, if not all of them, from going outside in the sun, particularly if you live in, a better environment that has quality solar yield. I'm from New York. I get it. Not everyone has great solar yield where they live all the time. I think in those places, if I was going to invest in one product, maybe two, because the first one would be a water filter, but this would probably be the second one. Because your light environment is that important. So getting the near infrared, the red light exposure, and the UV exposure when the sun is out is vital. It is, you cannot miss it. And it trickles into all the other aspects of your life. I've talked about them in, different videos. So the ones I use, just to wrap this up, are from Fringe, because I had some people ask on Instagram, like, which one do you use? Which one do you recommend? Fringe is the one I like the most. It's at a much better price point. I like the intensities that they use. And I like the fact that it's actually set to an auto timer of 20 minutes. So chances of you overdoing it are about zero, even if you forget. So, and they have a lot of different pieces. They have head pieces. They have straps. I like the long strap. I think it's the most adaptable, but there's also panels. Today through next Wednesday, so April 17th, I have a code. You could use it. It's Vincent 15. You get 15% off all of their products. So, I highly recommend them. I use them, and, especially in an area, we're getting into the spring, so hopefully less, but, particularly over the winter, they become really important. And I am using it more in practice and recommending it more in practice, because I see the disconnection from nature that a lot of modern humans are experiencing. So that's what I got for today. As far as that, again, you can check out the lights, Vincent 15, Fringe. Really like their products. Haven't signed up for the newsletter? Please do. Becoming Invincible. It's free. It's every week. It's a lot of what I talk about here in more detail with links and all that fun stuff. If you want to check out my breathwork course, you can check that out too. It's the Breathe Easy method, linked in my bio. Another pillar that I think, again, most folks are missing, but it's things you could do at home to empower yourself. That's what I got. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again next week. Have a good one. Okay.